So, welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, here to support you in overcoming disordered eating and finding peace with food. So, today I'm talking to Morgan Taylor DiPrimo, the founder of Align 33 Media, a non-profit media organization focused on eating disorder awareness, youth mental health advocacy, and systemic change through storytelling, education, and media. A filmmaker, speaker, and advocate with lived experience, Morgan is currently developing Mind Over Mirror, a documentary and investigative initiative examining the rise in eating disorders, the impact of social media and wellness culture, and the growing mental health crisis affecting young people globally. So, Morgan has interviewed over 400 individuals around the world, including clinicians, researchers, educators, treatment providers, parents, and people with lived experience to better understand why eating disorders are increasing at alarming rates and why so many families continue to struggle navigating care and support systems. And her work focuses on prevention, early intervention, media literacy, stigma reduction, and creating larger public conversations around eating disorders beyond traditional stereotypes. So, in this episode today, Morgan's going to be diving into talking more about the rise in eating disorders among younger populations and why more children are becoming sick earlier, looking at the impact of social media, wellness culture, algorithms, and body image pressures on youth mental health, looking at why eating disorders are still deeply misunderstood by the public despite increasing prevalence, talking a little bit about her own lived experience, recovery, and the emotional reality of living with an eating disorder, and a bit more about Mind Over Mirror, using film, storytelling, and media as tools for advocacy, prevention, and cultural change, the burden placed on families navigating treatment systems, and why eating disorders often hide behind success, perfectionism, athletics, and wellness culture. So, I don't forget through all of that, Morgan. It's a lot, isn't it? But
Yeah. Thank
such a
you.
wealth of information. But and thank you anyway. So much value packed in this episode. Welcome, Morgan, to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast.
Thank you, Harriet. Happy to be here.
So Morgan, before we dive in, you're just saying that you're in New York. So just tell us a bit about like how's New York today?
Well, New York right now is rainy, but it's super, super hot over here. And you guys are in Celsius, but we're in Fahrenheit. So it's about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So not so great for the hair, but we've had kind of a slow start to summer. So excited that it's warm out.
Sure. Yeah, well, good for you to be here. Okay, so let's dive in. So, eating disorders are on the rise, and particularly perhaps with children, young people. So, what is this about? Why are eating disorders more prevalent than ever?
I think it's a few different reasons. I think that kids and young adults have access to social media and media that, personally I didn't have when I was growing up. So AI has been very prevalent with these kids, and people have access to a lot more. Also, and I'm hesitant to speak about this because there's a growing rate of people who are taking GLP-1s and the way that the GLP-1s are being marketed towards all over social media. I think that there needs to be some, regulation when it comes to that, just because, people are getting it very easily, with very little oversight. So I think that there's a multitude of different reasons, and I think that, you know, now we've gone from like the body acceptance movement to kind of going backwards a little bit to we're seeing a lot of people having extreme thinness in the media and all that stuff. So I think it's a multitude of different reasons, but I think to summarize people are just having access to information all over the place, and we're kind of being inundated with information.
Sure. So it sounds like I guess it is the ocean that we're swimming in now, isn't it? Like it's almost so like normalized. And I guess I used to think in the past that social media generally was more like the icing on the cake or the fuel added to the fire, and like eating disorders were more about trauma, early stuff, family things and all of that. But it's so really interesting, isn't it? Because when you've just talked there, it's really emphasizing just the impact of social media, all the messages we're getting, the GLPs, like not to say that trauma and other things are not a big part of it. But it sounds like that whole other layer has just become so much more impactful, maybe, than it ever was. Like, I know for myself growing up, I didn't have social media at all, but it sounds like it's like so impactful.
Well, I always say, I think that, if you have an eating disorder, you're not just getting it because you saw something on social media. I think that genetics loads the gun, society pulls the trigger. And I think we're in a climate now that the trigger is just being pulled a lot faster, because it's just, if you're feeling upset, social media kind of says like, oh, like, unconsciously, like, here's a tool to use, or like, here's something that, could start out very innocently. I just want to eat healthy and be fit, and then it can turn into an obsession fairly quickly.
Yeah, no, sure. No, I mean it does really make sense. And then I guess with algorithms and social media and everything as well, do you want to say a bit more about that? Because I guess it's really tricky, isn't it? Once you go down a certain rabbit hole and you start looking at information, you can very quickly become inundated with it, can't you? And be overwhelmed with quite a limited view of reality.
Well, I'll give you a story. So I spoke to a woman who's 18 years old, and she has been suffering since she was 13. So I said, kind of just tell me a little bit about your story. Like, for lack of better words, like, why was this your coping skill? Like, what made you go towards food, as opposed to something else? And she was saying that, COVID was kind of really offset, a mental health, public health crisis, in my opinion. Um, and, being in isolation, not being in community, and then having social media kind of be something that you're seeing every day and being something that is turns into your community fairly quickly. It started off with her just wanting to eat healthy. And then the algorithm fed into that and it started feeding more restrictive content when it came to food. And then it kind of, you get into a rabbit hole because it knows what you're looking at. And then it gives you more of that. Also, with AI now, you could type in, want to lose 5 pounds, give me, examples on how to do that. And a lot of these kids are unfortunately doing that. And, it's leading down, that could push out disordered content as well. So that needs to be regulated. There's so many things that technology is advancing faster than humans could keep up with, and it's causing so many problems for these kids.
Yeah, I know. God, it's mind blowing, actually, isn't it? Just like, I mean, what you're saying is not new to me, but somehow it's just like when you really stop and think, it's quite mind blowing. So why are eating disorders still so misunderstood? Because I think this is just such a common problem, isn't it? Like people see in a way eating disorders as this sort of special thing over here, and they don't really relate it to dieting and eating clean and getting super fit, and it's almost like they're completely different things. So can you say a bit more about that? Why do you think they're so misunderstood?
I think there is a stigma when it comes to eating disorders, and there's like a sense of just stop. Why don't you just stop? Like, what's the problem? You know, um, and I think it's interesting with drugs and alcohol, there's a thing to blame, right? Well, they're like that because they're drinking, or they're like that because they're using, and they're not really like that. But with eating disorders, you don't see the substance per se. You just see the behavior and the person looking like they're willingly doing it. And it could get confusing because it's like, well, just stop. Like, don't you see that you're harming your family? Don't you see that, you're killing yourself? Don't you see that this is harmful? But also, too, like, from the eating disorder, from living experience, I could tell you that when you're malnourished, there's there's a medical part to that where there's fluid in your brain, so you're not able to think clearly. So your prefrontal cortex is being affected, but people can't see that. So they just see the behavior, they see the outburst, and they think that, you're just being difficult. And because the way that eating disorders are portrayed or have been portrayed in the media as a vanity issue for white teenage girls, there's a whole thing on you just want to look good when there could be a multitude of different reasons why someone is engaging in these behaviors, trauma being one of them. I interviewed a lot of people who have been unfortunately um, molested or sexually abused, and they don't want to, speaking from, the female lens, they don't want to look sexy or like a woman because they don't want to get hurt again. So it's actually a defense mechanism too.
Yeah, I think it's really important to mention, isn't it? Like eating disorders are absolutely not about vanity, are they? And they are a kind of coping strategy and a way of dealing with pain that perhaps just feels too unbearable to deal with in other ways.
Well, just think about the first thing that we learn as human beings is how to self-soothe through food, and it's natural from us. Like if we're crying, as a mom and your baby's crying, what do? You either burp them, change them, or feed them. Like this is human instincts. And I think that for kids, being in an unsettling time and having social media being not social media, just like media just being so accessible, and people having access to you 24/7, it creates kind of an unsettling environment. So what do kids know instinctually? They go to food because it's like if you're 8, you're probably not going to go to drugs and alcohol. I mean, I would hope not, but like it's like the first coping tool.
Yeah, no, so true. So can you say a little bit more about your own experience, Morgan? Like you suffered from an eating disorder, is that right?
Yes. So I started, well, I was diagnosed when I was 17 years old. I was engaging in behaviors 2 years before that, lost my menstrual cycle. It went undetected by doctors for about 2 years. So I had 2 year loss of menstrual cycle, which resulted in amenorrhea. And as a result of that, when I went into an outpatient treatment center, I managed okay. I graduated high school, got into college, and then my sophomore year, I relapsed significantly and ended up in a residential treatment program. Here in the States, we have, private pay insurance. So I was fortunate that I had insurance, but with eating disorders, particular because they are a medical and mental issue, the insurance company codes them as medical. So if your BMI is not quote unquote low enough, or if your vital signs are stabilized to a quote unquote normal level, and normal level is like 70% ideal body weight, that's what we're considering normal, um, you are not qualified for residential care. So I was quote unquote fortunate enough that I was allotted 6 weeks of residential treatment. However, I watched a lot of people get denied at the door. I watched a lot of people cycle in and out of treatment multiple times. And for me, I feel like more people should know about this because hopefully with that comes change. And, I've watched a lot of families going into financial debt, trying to get treatment for their loved ones. And I was just lucky, and health shouldn't
Yeah.
depend on luck.
Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? 'Cause I think it's slightly different in the US compared to the UK in terms of how you access treatment. But I think, obviously we've got the National Health Service in the UK, but it's still kind of gatekept a lot, really, and there's very under-resourced, although things have improved a lot. But definitely that message about not being thin enough almost or not being low enough weight often stopped a lot of people getting the help they needed. I think that's changing a bit in the UK. Like we've got initiatives like Freed, which is much more about early intervention, and we've got this whole Dump the Scales campaign by Hope Virgo, kind of getting all of these things. So that things are shifting, but it's still a long way to go.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I think the US, we've gotten a lot better of awareness, but like I said, people are just getting sicker faster and faster, and it's hard to keep up with. And eating disorders, to be blunt, we need more money behind it because it's a growing public health crisis.
So say a bit more about your project that you're doing now, and like I know you use a lot of kind of creative ways of kind of expressing things. Do you and kind of like getting messages out there? And so can you say a bit more about it?
Yeah. So I've interviewed over 400 people globally at this point. When I wanted to do this, it kind of was inspired from the idea of me going away and like basically, I feel like it's one of the untold stories that hasn't been told before, and and eating disorders, I feel like are very misunderstood in the media and portrayed as one way. So I really wanted to tell the story of not just about the illness, but about the road to recovery and what that looks like and how different it is to other recoveries. You have to, this is one of the few things that you have to, um, you have to eat every day and fuel yourself every day. So you have to kind of learn to cope with, I don't want to say your disorder, but if you have to, if you're an alcoholic, you don't have to drink every day. You're abstinent. If you're a drug addict, you're abstinent. But this is something that you have to learn to engage with and help a healthy behavior with. Um, I worked in television when I got out of treatment and I graduated to college. And I wanted to create awareness about this, but I was like, what can I do given my degree? I'm not going to go back to school and be a clinician. I have dyslexia, and that sounds like a nightmare. And ADHD. So sitting in a classroom, I don't think that's for me, but I think that creativity and storytelling has a really powerful way of changing the conversation. And I think that anybody could say a statistic of every 52 minutes, someone dies from an eating disorder, but it's very different when you hear someone's story saying, this is what happened to me, and you see a face behind it. So that's kind of what my inspiration is behind the project. We just filmed a trailer yesterday, actually, which is going to be going on a Line 33 Media, and that's going to be like our fundraising strategy and movement. With Mind Over Mirror is the t name of the documentary.
Okay. So is it all this kind of different creative projects and all the interviews, it's all being channeled into this Mind Over Mirror documentary? Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah, basically for the trailer, you'll kind of give an insight of what it will look like. It's um, eight different people telling their story, but I put it all together as one story. So it's a little haunting because you hear people from different parts of the world kind of talking about the same thing, and the same universal feelings, which is it's kind of eerie when you think about it. It's like this disorder really doesn't, try a new creative way of getting to anybody. It's like it's a little haunting, but I think a story needs to be told in order to raise awareness about this.
Okay. And are you talking just about anorexia or are you talking about the whole range of eating disorders?
In the trailer, I didn't specifically, and there's a whole range of eating disorders, but I didn't have people specifically name them. I think
Sure.
with that, you don't want to discredit anyone or discredit anyone's suffering. But that being said, what I found was there's a constant debate. Well, this is anorexia versus this is bulimia versus, well, binge eating is the more prevalent one. It's all a problem, and we all
Yeah.
need to work together to just solve the problem. You
Yeah.
know, um, Later when we have more money and resources, we could kind of break up a little bit, but I think it's just all a problem, and we all have to work together to solve it.
Sure. No, I mean, I agree. I think diagnosis can be helpful to some extent, can't it? But really, if you're suffering with your eating and it's disordered, that is valid, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So, and when are you hoping that the documentary will be released? Like, do you have a like ballpark date or anything?
Well, it all depends on, everyone being able to share the trailer and funding and, it's like all hands on deck. Everyone get this as much attention as possible. Ideally, I would like to be filming 2027 with a release date in 2028, 2029.
Sure. And is this, sorry, just being nosy here, is this like your full-time job, or you like working as
Yeah.
well? Like,
Yeah, I
yeah.
this is beyond full time. It's just me with all this. I have a board, Align 33 Media is a nonprofit. I have a board, but all the interviews, the trailer, the script writing, the connections, that is all me.
Sure. Gosh, well done.
Thank you.
You're obviously very passionate about it all.
Yeah, yeah.
And so say a little bit more as well about, you talked a little bit about how hard it is for families navigating the whole system and everything. But is there anything more you want to sort of say on that, like sort of for loved ones and carers who might be watching or listening?
Yeah, I mean, for families, it's very difficult, especially if their child is over the age of 18. Speaking specifically for the States, um, there's a multiple different things that I could talk about, but one of them, I'll say there's a question of competency. If you reach a certain point, are you no longer competent enough to make medical decisions for yourself? And how does care determine that? Um, so on a state by state basis, every state has a different law when it comes to declaring competency. So this becomes an issue if you're being treated in the United States, but then let's say you have to go to a hospital, one of the most prominent hospitals for eating disorders in Colorado, the laws changes from New York to Colorado. So in one state, a family can have access to their loved one's medical records, but in another state, and make medical decisions for them, but in another state, they might not be able to. And if the family member is not willing to sign off on that, they're kind of left in the dark. I don't know if you have that in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK, it can definitely be a little bit different between, geographically where you're based. I mean, I think probably less so in terms of around like things like access to records and things like that. I think that's more because we're under the umbrella of the National Health Service, which is across the UK. Um, that that side of things I think is probably a bit more aligned, but it can definitely be different in terms of like what part of the country you live in terms of what treatment you get when you would be admitted to hospital. All of those things could be quite different and depending on level of resources and things like that. So still could be very confusing, but maybe in slightly different ways.
Yeah. No, and it's also too like if you have a young, and this is like horrible, but like if you have a young child I've talked to parents who have kids that are 8 years old that need residential treatment, and a lot of residential treatment centers don't take kids that are that young. And there's few that do, but then there's a question of, okay, if we're in New York and the center's in California and the child needs a higher level of care, you're going to do anything for your child. Like you're kind of breaking up the family in order for the child to receive that care. And if you have more than one child, the sibling is impacted. Like there's in the best case scenario, and like if I could wave a magic wand, is every hospital would have an eating disorder unit that knew how to treat these acute cases. Um, because unfortunately, I think we're at the point that we need that.
Mm, sure. I'm just aware as well. I guess it's a whole nother thing, I think, isn't it, in a way, like when children are going into hospital and just the need that they have and how they need to be cared for. And it's quite different from, I mean, I know for most of my career, I've worked in adult eating disorder services where someone is usually at least 17 or 18 and they're making their own choices. And even though they're very ambivalent about change, they're still a bit more in the driving seat of their recovery. But I think it's very different, isn't it, when it's a younger child, particularly, 8 years old or something.
Yeah, I mean, you're also the growth chart is impacted, and that's a little scary. It's like kid is good in the sense that as a parent, you have access to make medical decisions for them. Um, but it's bad in the sense that the kid is growing and, things could be impacted long term. As an adult, if the adult gets sick, most of the time they're no longer growing, but if they lose their menstrual cycle, that's an issue. Like it's just, you know, it's complicated.
Yeah, no, so true. So talk as well a little bit about sort of eating disorders in athletes, the whole thing about wellness culture, like, being successful. Like, I know we sort of talked a bit before about how eating disorders are quite misunderstood by the culture. But I'm sort of thinking as well here, like sometimes people can really be praised, can't they? Almost for some of the roads towards disordered eating. I think once someone crosses a threshold, then people can feel very anxious and worried, and they can recognize someone's quite unwell. But say, for example, in the earlier stages, an athlete might actually have an eating disorder, but they might be winning races. They might look really lean and fit and being praised. And can you just say a bit more about that? Because I think this is another layer, isn't it, that complicates things?
Yeah, speaking specifically for athletes, like at what you said, they could be praised, they could be known as disciplined, and if money is on the line and people are making money off of them, they're not going to want them to stop. Um, so I always kind of like to explain things with a story. I think it's a little bit more interesting, but was talking to this one athlete who is a football player, and he was saying that a lot of the behaviors that he was engaging in, you know, a lot of other athletes were engaging in. It's viewed as discipline, determination. He had a goal to make it to the major to play professionally. And it was something that there was a point where there could have been a lot of money on the line, like life-changing money. Um, and the one thing that I thought it was interesting is, if you're doing things like missing out on family events to train because you have this goal, it's like a hard line, right? It's like, well, are they disciplined? Are they driven? Is this the goal that matters to them? Or is this something that could be disordered? Um, Taking football out of it or a sport out of it, I think it's also very interesting the difference between male and female suffering with this because if a guy is in the gym, he's known as a gym rat, like it's almost like praised. Whereas in my opinion, I feel like a female can only go up to a certain point and then it's like, oh, she has a problem. But the guys rarely get detected. Um, it's very prevalent in wrestling because they have to make weight. And if they're don't make weight, they don't play. And if you're in college on a scholarship and you don't make weight and you don't play, you could lose your scholarship. Like there's so much that is on the line for them.
Yeah.
And it makes it really hard because you don't want to tell someone to stop what they're doing, but you want to make sure that they're doing it in the healthiest way possible.
Mm, yeah. No, so I mean, so interesting, isn't it? And I think just you sharing that story there just really highlights the conflict, I guess, in kind of values and stuff, isn't it? And the messages that we're getting, the affirmation, the validation you're kind of getting for taking one path, and how that can then really conflict with self-care, looking after yourself, having a healthy relationship with food. And I think it's very challenging, isn't it? And like you say, when money's on the line, when you're in a sport where you've objectively perhaps got to be at below a certain weight or something, I think that's very, very hard, isn't it, to find that peaceful place and to reconcile all of that.
I was even speaking at the university that I went to, Pace University, and a lot of people that came to hear me speak were dancers. And they were saying that in their major, they have to, and this is not just specifically to PACE, this is, like all across the board. They have to have a social media presence because if someone wants to hire you, they kind of want to buy the audience that comes with it. It makes business sense. But then with that and having and dancers too, like that's something that you're always looking in the mirror. You're always like hyper fixated or aware of your body. Um, it's something that in the past, there's a huge emphasis on how your body looks and if someone's going to have to lift you, what that's going to look like, you know. Um, so, and then on top of that, being 18 and now having that, but also having to have a social media presence where people could also comment on your body or comment on, you know, your even like the talent that you have as a dancer. I think that's very hard and that's a lot of pressure. And it's hard because I don't really have advice for that. Like, I don't want to tell someone not to live out their dream. But that being said, if it's so detrimental, I feel for these kids.
Yeah, it's hugely challenging, isn't it? Hugely challenging.
Yes.
So, Morgan, is there anything else perhaps that I haven't asked you that you would like to, any sort of other messages you would like to impart to the listeners, or anything else about your project you would like to mention?
Um, I will say that, I mean, we kind of touched on this that, if you know anybody that has an eating disorder or is struggling and, you're getting frustrated with them because it's a very frustrating illness, this is not something that is a choice. I don't think people want to live like this. Sometimes there's, speaking from lived experience, sometimes you feel like there's no way out or you don't know how to live, not like how to live like quote unquote normally. Um, and I know that it's not the nicest of disorders. It could be, it could be manipulative, but it's something that the person is really struggling with, and it usually stems from a lot of trauma. Um, and there's a lot of hurt and pain behind it. So I I think for people just to have a better understanding of, what this actually is would be my hope with my project and to have a little bit more compassion.
Mm. So really just, yeah, getting that message out there in a way that eating disorders are not about vanity or attention seeking or anything else, are they? They are coping strategies for deeper pain, and the person isn't choosing to use this strategy. They are kind of doing the best they can at this time, and it's survival sometimes, isn't it? It's not a choice. So we can't just tell someone to like pull themselves together and start eating, or, because if it was that straightforward, they probably would have done it themselves, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And like from my own experience too, like, everyone says like the stereotypical anorexic weighs themselves every day. I will tell you that I didn't. I was afraid of the scale. I was afraid that people would see how much weight I lost. So I would wear like baggy clothes, like all this stuff. It was absolutely not a vanity thing for me. Like I didn't want people to see it. To me, that was embarrassing. Um, and it was kind of harmful. Like then when people would say like, "Oh, you just care about looking good," and it's like, or you just weigh yourself constantly. I think there's a lot of assumptions when it comes to eating disorders, and what I've learned from doing the work that I have, a lot of people just want you to listen.
Yeah, and I think that's a great bit of advice actually to leave the podcast on, actually, isn't it? If you take
Yeah.
one thing away from this, actually, just listen more probably, and try to understand that person's experience is going to be more helpful often than many of the other things we try to do.
Yeah.
Um, So, Morgan, we really look forward to your documentary release down the line. So you have to kind of keep me informed of that, and then you have to come back on the podcast when it is, when it's out in the world.
Yes.
So so I guess just thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and for sharing your wisdom and for all the work you're doing. And if people want to get in touch with you, want to find out more about the documentary, where are the best places for them to go?
Yeah, I'm on Substack as a Line 33 Media, Morgan DiPrimo. Morgan DiPrimo on Instagram, Morgan DiPrimo on TikTok. And then for a trailer, the trailer is going to be released on social media, but it's also going to be released on align33media.org.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, I'll just make sure I get all those links from you and I shall put
Yes.
them in the show notes. Okay. So yeah, so thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time and yeah, look forward to hearing you from you again in the future as things develop.
Awesome. Thank you so much.